Chag Sameach and Good Moed to everybody. Today we're going to learn a little bit of the laws of Lashon Hara. So we're talking about a very common case. We spent most of this book talking about that we're not allowed to speak evil about each other. We're not allowed to gossip about each other and say negative things and share negative information. It's a very egregious sin. Many positive and negative prohibitions that a person violates if he does that. And we're talking about something now which is pretty relevant. Sometimes we have to share negative information to protect somebody. Let's say your friend is going into business with somebody and you know that that person is not an honest person and he's dishonest. So in some cases there's a mitzvah to share that information with your friend. So we learned that there are 5 conditions one needs to have before he shares that information. 1 is to contemplate that the information you have is accurate. 2 is that you're not allowed to exaggerate when you share the information. 3 is that your intent has to be for a constructive purpose, meaning you're not trying to get revenge on the person. 4 is that the only way that you can protect your friend is by telling him. There's no other way that you can protect him. I apologize if anyone watching on the live stream, it might be a little choppy today, but I'm going to put a YouTube recording which should be better quality after. Okay, then the last condition is what we're going to discuss today. The 5th condition is that you're not allowed to tell the information, or you're only allowed to tell the information if it's not going to cause damage to the person you're speaking about. So let's say your friend wants to go into business with Tom, and you know Tom is a thief, or let's say he's a dishonest person. You know, he cuts corners, or maybe he steals some money from the partnership in the past, and you don't want your friend to go into business with Tom. So if something bad is going to happen to Tom, by you telling him, you're not allowed to repeat the information. So now we're going to discuss that. Now there's going to be 2 cases, 2 primary cases that we're going to discuss. One is when you yourself know the information, and the second case is when you and another person know the information. Now why is it different when 2 people know the information? The reason is because in Jewish court, information is only believed to make a final monetary verdict when there are 2 witnesses. But 1 witness isn't enough. So if one person comes into rabbinical court and says, Tom stole money from him, the court says, well, we can't believe you, it's only 1 person. But if 2 people come into court and say, we saw Tom stealing from so-and-so, then they'll say, okay, Tom, give it back. So let's get started. We're in Klal Tes Halacha Hey, 9.5. Ve'ata navu levar be'ezras Hashem, Od Iker Gadol be'inyanam Eila. We're going to explain an important principle in these topics. By the Zay is Barlacha Gamkin Pranach Hamishim. We're also going to explain through that the 5th condition that we were mentioning. Hanal. Da. Dechol etzem haheter shekasavnu b'sif Aleph hanu dafki me'ish shehu mesaper lo gamar adayin ha'inyan im hashekenegdo rak hiskimu biyachad ligmor sa'inyan ahu avolim gamar imo inyan kolech lefin yonom avor b'poskim mashening mardachit kanyanim sheyasurim lachsor mizachakach toli bazeh. So he says that the whole time that we're talking about sharing information with your friend to protect him, that's only when it's still relevant, when you're still in the topic. For example, your friend is still in a partnership with Tom, and you want him to be wary of some shenanigans Tom might pull. But if your friend is no longer in a partnership with Tom, then there's no reason to tell him. Or if he's in the middle of a transaction with Tom, and he's purchasing something from Tom, and you have suspicion that the item might be defective, then you could tell him with the other conditions. But if he already bought it and there's no way he can return it, then you're not allowed to share it. So that's the first thing. If it's no longer relevant, you can't share the information. But if it is still relevant, it depends on this. Im hu yodea shemachmas diburo shigalalo lo yasa lekishenegdo shum hezek rak sheme'ata yishmor es atzmo shaliyavalo shum hezek imeno v'nishlam lezek gamkin kol apratim havar la'el b'sif beis azai mutter. If you know by telling your friend about Tom's past of being a dishonest person and a thief, you know that your friend is a level-headed guy and he's not going to damage Tom in any way. He's not going to cause him any negativity, but he's just going to protect himself in the future. Then you're allowed to tell him, and it's the right thing to tell him. Aval, however, Imhu makeres teva ha'ish shehu misaperlo. If you know that your friend, he has a certain inclination, sheim yiglalo asadavar yachlitu takef levade gamor. Your friend is going to believe that it's totally true what you're telling him right away. Oh, mishum sheteva lahamin takef ral chaver. Always the type of person that always believes evil about others. Oh, mishum sheyesh lo alav devar manikarm. Or he has reason already to suspect Tom. Oh, mishum shesomech alav ma'od. Or he just listens to everything you say and he believes you. V'yafsek tekafatin la'atzmo, and you know what he's going to do? He's going to take justice into his own hands. V'yasem ma'isa dahainu lachzor me'aka shenagdo, and he's going to say, you know what, Tom, I'm not going to be your partner anymore, and he's just going to make a rash decision. Or shar in yana hezek, or he's going to do something else. Maybe he'll go to Tom and he'll say, oh, I heard you were taking money from me, and he'll steal money back from Tom. Now, even though that what your friend is doing is really what a rabbinical court would decree if the information you're saying is true. Nevertheless, it's forbidden to tell him. Why? Why is it forbidden? Right? You're telling him that Tom stole from him and that he's an untrustworthy guy, and he went and took his money back. So why aren't you allowed to share that with your friend? So the reason is Kevin Shivdiburu who Gorim Hezek Lehanidon, Mashalo Haya Yotze Al Yidei Devarav, Afilim Haya Medalav Bezin, Kilo Haya Oimer Alav, Inyan Ze Gufa Bezin, Lo Haya Chelis Biad Bezin, the Chayav Asomaman Al Yidei Dibur, Kihu Erechad, Vatahu Gorim Lehanidon Hezek Mamish Al Yidei Dibur. Because if you, even though what you're saying is true, if you were in a rabbinical court and you testified that Tom stole money from your friend, they wouldn't believe you because you don't have two witnesses. They can't act on your information. So here what's happening is by you sharing the information with you're sharing with your information with friend, and he's a very rash person and he just totally believes you and now is going to take justice into his own hands. That isn't fair, because if this case was in court, the verdict would not be in your friend's favor. The verdict would be in Tom's favor due to lack of evidence. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. Ulefizeh. According to this, if there are two people who saw this, and they saw what happened, they saw Tom stole, or he's a thief, that type of person, then it appears that it's allowed. All they want to do is to remove any damage that will befall their friend. But it has to be, this is important, it has to be that what's going to happen to Tom isn't worse than what a rabbinical court would impose. Meaning, if you and your friend, well, now there's three people involved, you and the other witness go and tell your friend what Tom was doing to him, and Tom is going to get thrown in jail for 20 years, and your friend is going to beat him up, even with two witnesses, you're not allowed to tell him. Only if what's going to happen to Tom is what a rabbinical court would impose on him. If you we just mentioned, and also we can't. You have to have all of the other conditions which we mentioned at the beginning of the class. So just to summarize, when are you allowed? You have negative information about someone your friend is going into a partnership with. So when are you allowed to share it? So in addition to the conditions we mentioned earlier, let's just review that. We have to review that. You also has to be still relevant. We have to be he's still a partner with him, or he didn't finish the transaction yet, and it has to be that your friend's only going to protect himself for the future, and there will be no hezek, there will be no damage that will befall the person you're telling about, because had you gone into rabbinical court, they would not have issued a verdict in your favor. So if right away when you tell your friend about his partner, he's going to leave the partnership rashly, you're not allowed to tell him. However, if you have two people, then you could tell him. And even with two people, you can't share the information if something very bad is going to happen to the person that is worse than what a rabbinical court would impose. So I know these laws are very technical and confusing, but it just shows us that it's not only an esrog and a lulav and a sukkah that we have all these technicalities and we have all these detailed laws about how the mitzvah has to be, but also when it comes to the way we treat others and the way we speak about others, we also have just as detailed laws, and that's why it's very important to have a rabbi who has learned these things to be able to discuss it with him if these matters come up, right? If you have a question in your sukkah, you call the rabbi to see if it's kosher. So the same thing when we're dealing with interpersonal relationship. If you have a question, it's important to call a Torah scholar and a rabbi to get proper guidance in that area, and have a good moed and a Chag Sameach.